Wyoming Territory, late September of 1879. The wind came sharp off the hills, biting through the cottonwoods lining the creek, and the old shack was barely standing against it. Juna Elridge stumbled through the brittle brush, one hand pressed tight against her ribs, the other holding shut the torn edge of her coat. Her lip was split, her right eye swollen, and there was blood in her hair. The shack loomed ahead, abandoned, gray with age, and leaning east, but it had a roof and four walls. That was enough. She pushed the broken door open and stepped inside, stumbling over a half-rotted floorboard before falling to her knees. The air inside smelled of damp wood and dust. She crawled to a corner and curled up on the dirt floor, her back to the wall, her arms wrapped tight around herself. The silence was thick. She welcomed it. Outside, the wind hissed through cracks in the walls. She had nothing. No money. No family left. And now, no husband, not that he had ever been a real one. He had taken everything from her except her will to run. That she had clung to like a lifeline. He had been drunk when she took the horse and fled. Maybe he would not follow. Maybe he would. Hours passed. The light in the shack shifted from dull gray to the golden orange of sunset. Her body ached, but she did not move. She just stared at the door. Then came the sound of hooves. Her breath caught. The rider came slow, the rhythmic clop of his horse echoing through the hush. He paused outside the shack, and Juna could see the shadow of him through the cracks in the wood, tall in the saddle, the setting sun behind him. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Someone in there?" She did not answer. She could not. But something in her chest pulled tight, like her silence was a plea all its own. He dismounted. The door creaked open. He stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low over sun-darkened eyes. His coat was dusty from the trail, his boots worn. He looked around, eyes adjusting to the dim before they found her in the corner. She flinched. He took a slow step forward, then stopped. "You hurt?" She nodded once. He crouched low, careful not to crowd her. "Name's Keaton Ward. I was headed east when I saw your horse loose by the creek. Figured someone might be in trouble." Juna's lips trembled, but she did not speak. She could not. Keaton looked her over without judgment, his eyes steady and calm. "You need a doctor?" "No," she whispered. Just need to breathe." He nodded and stood. "I am not going to touch you. Just going to get my bedroll. I will stay outside if it makes you easier." She blinked at the quiet respect in his voice, the way he gave her space without stepping away completely. He stepped outside and returned minutes later with a blanket, setting it down near her without a word. Then, true to what he said, he stayed outside by his fire as the night came cold and hard. Juna lay awake most of the night, listening to the crackle of his fire, the low hum of him humming something tuneless under his breath. There was something steady about it, like the sound of a man who had known storms and survived them. By morning, she had not moved, but her body had stopped shaking. When the door pushed open again, and Keaton stepped inside with a tin cup of hot coffee, she took it with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. "You got a name?" "Juna." He smiled, small, quiet. "That is a good name." They sat in silence for a while. She sipped the coffee slowly. He leaned against the wall across from her, arms crossed over his chest. "Do you want to tell me who did that to you?" he asked, voice low. "No, all right." That was it. No pressure. No prying. Just a man willing to stand between her and more pain if needed. After a long silence, Juna looked up. "He will be looking." Keaton's jaw tightened. "Then we will make sure he does not find you." I am not riding off and leaving you here." She stared at him. She had not expected kindness. Not from a stranger. Not anymore. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." Later that morning, she limped out of the shack for the first time and saw his horse, a deep brown gelding with a calm eye. Keaton helped her into the saddle, careful and patient, and then tied the reins of her runaway mare to his saddle horn. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe. I got a friend up near Buffalo who runs a ranch. You can rest there." Juna hesitated. "You sure?" He met her eyes. "I do not leave people behind." They rode slow. The sun rose high and warm. Keaton kept close, but never too close. He asked no questions. He just rode beside her like he had all the time in the world. That night, they stopped by the river. He built the fire, cooked beans and bacon, and offered her the better blanket without a word. Juna watched his hands, big, strong, calloused as he worked. She watched the way he moved, how he looked at her like she was not broken, like she was just someone worth protecting. "You always like this?" she asked quietly over the fire. He glanced at her. "Like what? Kind." He shrugged. "Maybe. Just do not like seeing people hurt." She looked away, but her throat tightened. No one had looked at her that way in a long time. Later, when the fire burned low, she looked across the flames at him. "Thank you for stopping." "You did not say a word," he said, voice soft in the dark. "I did not have to." He smiled again, small, warm, and true. And for the first time in months, Juna felt something near hope. The third morning on the trail broke pale and brittle, frost curling along the edges of willow leaves, and the creek running slow and clear through the bend. Juna sat near the fire, legs tucked beneath her skirt, her hands wrapped tight around the tin cup Keaton had filled with hot water and a sliver of dried mint he'd pulled from a pouch the night before. Keaton didn't speak as he packed the food into his saddlebag. He moved with the quiet rhythm of a man who knew how to make space without making distance. The kind of quiet that didn't ask anything in return. Juna watched him from beneath the edge of her shawl. The bruising on her ribs had deepened into shades of yellow and plum, tender but manageable now. Her limbs still carried the ache of the road, but the worst of the pain had settled. What remained was a tightness in her chest that hadn't eased since Missouri. "Your friend," she said, voice low. "The one with the ranch. What's his name?" "Elias Granger," Keaton replied, cinching the last strap on his saddle. "We rode together in Texas, pushed cattle north through a blizzard once. He's got a wife now. 2 daughters. Good folks." Juna nodded slowly. "You trust him?" He looked up at her then. "I do." She turned her gaze to the creek. "I don't know how to be around people anymore." "Don't have to know right off," he said. "Just gotta want to try." She folded the edge of her shawl more tightly over her shoulder. "I'm not sure I do. Want to try, I mean." Keaton stepped over to the fire and squatted beside it, eyes on the coals. "You don't have to decide that today." Juna glanced at him. "You always this patient." His mouth curved just slightly, not a grin, but something gentler. "Only when it matters." They rode out once the sun cleared the ridge. The land opened wide around them, hills rolling soft and golden under the autumn sky. A hawk circled high overhead, casting a long shadow over the grass. By midday, they passed a burned-out homestead, its chimney still standing like a tombstone. Juna slowed her mare and stared. The fence rails were blackened and broken. The barn had collapsed inward. Keaton drew up beside her. "Fire came through here last year. Early snow helped some. Too late for this place." She stared at the scorched earth around the house. "I used to think homes were solid things. Like if you nailed down enough boards and kept the chimney warm, nothing could touch you." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was steady. "Folks build again. Maybe not in the same spot. Maybe not the same way. But they build." Juna nudged her horse forward. "You ever lose one?" He hesitated. Then, "Yeah. My brother and I built a cabin near the Powder River. Spent 2 winters there. Spring flood took it all." He didn't come back the next year. She looked over at him. "Where'd you go after that?" "South. Found work, kept moving. Started saving to buy some land." Still saving. They rode in silence a while longer, the trail narrowing through a grove of cottonwoods. The wind rustled the branches overhead, and the scent of dry leaves filled the air. That night, they camped beside a shallow draw where the grass grew long and the stars came out sharp and bright. Keaton laid the fire low and offered Juna the canteen after supper. She drank, then passed it back. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked quietly. He settled back against his saddle, arms crossed. "Yeah, more lately." "What's keeping you from it?" He looked over at her, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw, the dust in his hair. "Wasn't sure I had a reason to stay anywhere." "That's changing." She met his gaze, something shifting between them like the slow wind in pine branches, nothing sudden, but sure. "Do you ever wonder how you're supposed to start over when you don't even recognize yourself anymore?" she asked. He didn't look away. "Maybe you don't have to start over. Maybe you just keep walking till you find something that feels like yours." She was quiet a long time, then drew her knees up and rested her chin on them. "I used to paint. Not anything grand. Just little things. Buckets, kitchen walls, signs for the market." Keaton blinked, thoughtful. "You still have your brushes?" "No. Left them behind." He reached into his saddlebag without a word, and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Found these in a trading post store last winter. Was gonna send them to my niece, but she's taken to sewing instead. You want them? She unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside were 3 worn brushes and a tin of dried pigment. Her breath caught. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. She looked down at the brushes, then up at him. I'd like to try again, if that's all right. Keaton's smile was quiet, but it reached his eyes. It's more than all right. The wind settled. The fire crackled low. And for the first time and longer than she could remember, Juna felt the shape of something not yet built, but possible. Something with roots. They reached the edge of Elias Granger's land near dusk, the sun low and burnished, casting long shadows over the high grass and the sloping pastures beyond. Juna sat straighter in the saddle, her back tight with the unease of nearing strangers. Keaton rode close but said nothing, letting the hush settle between them as they followed a narrow trail lined with split-rail fencing. Beyond a shallow rise, the ranch came into view. A 2-story house with whitewashed clapboards stood flanked by a wide barn and a smokehouse, with chickens pecking near the porch and 2 children chasing a dog across the yard. The sight of a lived-in-place shoes on the steps, laundry strung up to dry, a rocking chair tipped just slightly askew, made something twist deep in Juna's chest. Keaton dismounted first. Come on, he said gently. They're good people. She slid down slowly, her knees stiff from the ride. As they approached, a woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. Her hair was pinned back in loose coils, streaked with early gray, and her eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of them. Keaton lifted a hand. Evening, Nora. The woman's expression softened. Lord, Keaton Ward, I thought you were a ghost coming over that hill. A tall man stepped out after her, wiping sweat from his brow with a kerchief tucked into his collar. You bring trouble or company? Maybe both, Keaton said. This is Juna. She's come a far ways. Needs a place to rest for a time. Elias's gaze moved to her face, then dipped briefly to the bruises still fading along her temple. He didn't speak of them. You're welcome under my roof, he said simply. No questions asked. Nora stepped forward. You hungry, miss? Juna hesitated, then nodded. Come on then. You rest your bones while I put something on the stove. Inside, the house smelled of biscuits and wood polish. The youngest girl, no more than 5, peeked shyly from behind a doorway, her fingers sticky with molasses. Juna sat at the edge of a bench near the hearth, unsure where to put her hands. Nora set a plate in front of her. Don't be polite about it. You look like you need the whole skillet. Juna murmured a thank you, her voice hoarse with the weight of the day. Later, after the meal, Keaton stepped out with Elias to tend the horses. Juna found herself alone with Nora, who poured water from a basin and laid out a fresh cloth. You want clean clothes? Nora asked. I've got a few things that might fit. I was smaller once. Juna touched the hem of her sleeve, frayed and stained from the trail. That would be kind. Nora disappeared into a side room and returned with a folded dress and a pair of wool stockings. You can wash up in the back room. I'll keep the children out. As Juna peeled off the clothes she'd worn since fleeing Missouri, she caught her reflection in the glass above the washstand. Her face looked thinner than she remembered, her eyes too old. The bruises had faded, but the hollows beneath her cheekbones remained. She ran a damp cloth down her arms, rinsed the trail dust from her neck, and pulled the clean dress over her head. The fabric was soft, worn in the way only something long used and well cared for could be. She tied the sash around her waist and stepped out into the hall. Keaton was waiting just beyond the parlor, one hand resting on the banister. He looked up when she came through, and something in his face shifted, not surprise, not pity, just a quiet recognition of the change in her. Feel better? He asked. She nodded. Lighter. They stepped out onto the porch. The night had settled gentle over the land, the stars just beginning to show. Elias said we can stay a while, he said. There's work if I want it. Fence mending, winter prep. I thought maybe. If you wanted time, this could be a place for it. Juna leaned against the porch rail, the breeze lifting the hair at her neck. I don't know what I want yet. That's all right. She looked over at him. What about you? I've never wanted much, he said. But lately, I've been thinking about what it would be like to stop running. Juna traced the grain of the wood beneath her fingers. You think a place can hold still long enough for that? Some can, he said. Or maybe it's not the place at all. Maybe it's who you're with. Silence stretched between them, not heavy but full. The kind of silence that held room for breath. She turned toward him. You didn't have to ride this far with me. No, he said. But I wanted to. She studied his face in the low light creases at the corners of his eyes, the way his jaw eased when he looked at her. The steadiness of him wasn't loud. It didn't push or demand. It just stayed. I never thought kindness could feel this solid, she said. Keaton's voice came quiet. It's not a favor, Juna. It's a choice. She stepped closer, close enough to watch him draw breath. Then I think I'd like to choose too. He didn't reach for her. He waited, and when she placed her hand in his, it wasn't trembling. It was steady. Inside, the lamplight glowed warm behind the windows. Somewhere, Nora laughed with her girls. The night air carried the scent of hay and clean earth. Juna looked out across the darkened fields, then back at Keaton. I don't want to sleep in separate places tonight. He gave a small nod. We'll take the loft above the barn. Elias said it's clean and quiet. Together, they stepped down into the yard, their shadows stretching beside them. And for the first time in her memory, Juna didn't feel like she had to run to stay safe. She'd found something better. She'd found someone who stayed. The loft above the barn smelled of dry hay and cedar, the beams overhead thick with the kind of dust that settles when years pass quiet and undisturbed. Juna stood near the ladder, eyes adjusting to the dim. The lantern Keaton had brought casting a soft, amber light against the rafters. The air was warm enough, the storm doors latched against the wind, and the thick quilts folded in a cedar chest gave the place a comfort she hadn't expected. Keaton spread one out over the hay-piled floor while she unpinned her hair and shook it loose. The silence stretched easy between them, broken only by the distant creak of the barn's siding and the quiet shifting of the horses below. When she lowered herself onto the blanket, her movements were slow but unguarded. You ever stay in one place this long? She asked, folding her legs beneath her. He sat across from her, boots off, coat draped over a beam. Not since I was a boy. My folks had a wheat patch near Independence. Never saw it through harvest. She tilted her head. What happened? Drought took the first crop. My father tried planting again, but by the second summer, there wasn't enough money to wait for rain. He packed us into a wagon and headed west. He leaned back on his hands, eyes steady on hers. I learned quick not to count on anything staying. Juna's fingers traced the hem of the quilt. I used to think I had a quiet life. Not much, but enough. A garden. A warm room. I thought that was safety. That kind of safety's real, he said. But it takes more than soil and walls to hold it. She looked over at him. What holds it then? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched her, his expression unreadable but not distant. People, he said finally. People who don't flinch when things get hard. People who stay when it's easier to leave. Juna looked down, her voice quieter. I've never had someone stay. He didn't touch her, didn't move closer, just said, you do now. That night, they lay side by side beneath the quilt, not touching, but close enough she could hear the rhythm of his breathing. The barn creaked as the wind shifted, but she felt no fear. The quiet between them held no weight, just warmth. In the morning, sunlight spilled through the slats in thin, golden lines. Juna woke first. She turned her head to find him already watching her, one arm folded behind his head, the other resting lightly over his chest. You always wake early? She asked, her voice husky with sleep. He nodded. Habit. Days start early when you work land that isn't yours. They climbed down and stepped into a morning touched with frost. Nora had left a kettle on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. Juna tore off a piece and handed it to Keaton as they sat on the steps, their breath white in the air. You think Elias would teach me to help with the livestock? She asked, brushing crumbs from her lap. Keaton glanced over. You want to learn? I want to feel useful, she said. I need to do something with my hands again, not just hide behind walls. He'll show you. He doesn't like wasted hands. The next days unfolded slow and full. Juna learned to carry buckets without sloshing them, to sweep a stall clean, to watch a cow's gate for signs of lameness. Nora showed her how to mend a bridle strap and keep a sourdough starter alive. The girls took to her easily, trailing her with questions and laughter. At dusk, Juna would find Keaton by the fence line, brushing down the gelding or checking the posts. She'd lean beside him, not always speaking, just being there. One evening, she brought him a tin of biscuits folded in cloth. "I figured you'd forget to stop working," she said, holding them out. He took one and bit into it without ceremony. "You're not wrong." She smiled then, a small thing, but real. "You think you'll stay here?" she asked. He considered. "If there's reason to. And if I stayed." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "Then I'd have reason." That night, when she reached for his hand in the loft, he didn't hesitate. His fingers curled around hers without needing words. No promises, no declarations. Just the quiet certainty of two people who'd chosen the same place, the same breath, the same time. And for Juna, that was enough. For now, and maybe for always. The wheat-colored hills beyond the Granger Ranch turned pale with frost by early November, and the mornings came sharp with cold that hung in the breath and clung to the porch railings. Juna arose before the others now, finding stillness in the quiet hour before the house stirred. She lit the stove in the kitchen and let the warmth gather around her as she kneaded bread, her hands moving steady through the rhythm she'd begun to relearn. Keaton had taken to checking the yearlings at dawn, his boots leaving narrow tracks across the frozen mulch. Every morning he returned with his shoulders dusted in hayseed, and every morning he found her at the stove, sleeves pushed back, hair tied in a rough knot. No words passed between them in those first moments, only the exchange of a look simple, sure, and understood. That morning, Elias stood at the barn door, rubbing his jaw with a thoughtful frown. Fence line toward the east pastures pulling loose. "Need someone to ride out and set it straight." "I'll go," Keaton said, cinching the strap on his saddlebag. Elias jerked his thumb toward the rise. "Snow's likely to come down before dusk." "You sure?" Keaton glanced toward the house, where Juna's silhouette moved behind the curtain. "I won't linger." He rode out not long after, and Juna stood at the window until his figure disappeared into the trees. She didn't name the worry that settled in her chest. It was a quiet thing, not born from fear, but from the growing shape of what he meant to her. Later that day, Nora handed her a folded apron and gestured toward the pantry. "I saved your jars," she said. "The ones you painted for the girls' gooseberries. They keep asking when you'll do more." Juna flushed, fingers brushing the edge of the cloth. "I didn't think they'd notice." "They notice everything," Nora said. "And they like having something made by you." Juna set to work by the window, mixing ochre into boiled linseed and brushing careful strokes onto the clay jars. She painted wild yarrow on one, a sage hen on another. Her hand didn't tremble anymore. When the snow came, it arrived fast, wet, and heavy, blanketing the ground by early afternoon. Juna paused at the door, watching the flakes fall thick and quiet. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't expected it so soon. Elias stepped up beside her. "He's smart," he said. "He'll wait out the worst of it if he needs to." But dusk pressed on, and the trail beyond the hill stayed empty. Juna paced the parlor while Nora set out plates for supper, her eyes flicking toward the window with every gust of wind. When the barn door creaked open well past nightfall, and Keaton stepped through, his coat soaked through, his shoulders hunched against the cold, Juna dropped the ladle she'd been holding and crossed the floor before she could think. He looked up, eyes tired but clear. "Sorry I'm late," he said, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Had to dig out a post that was near snapped at the base." "You're soaked through," she said, breath catching. "You could have frozen out there." "Didn't," he said simply, then paused. "I kept thinking about the light in that kitchen window. Figured I'd find it waiting." She helped him out of his coat, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. "Come sit. I'll bring you something warm." He followed her to the hearth, where she pressed a steaming bowl into his hands and settled beside him on the floor. The fire crackled low. Outside, the snow kept falling. Keaton glanced over between spoonfuls. "You never asked me what I planned to do come spring. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." He set the bowl aside. "I've been saving toward a piece of land south of here. Good soil, close enough to town for trade. Wasn't sure I'd ever build anything on it. Just kept the idea in my pocket." She turned to him fully. "And now, I want to build it for two," he said. "If you'd want to be part of that." Juna's breath left her soft and full. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." His hand found hers, warm and rough and steady. She leaned into his shoulder, and the quiet settled around them like a promise. They married the following spring beneath the cottonwoods that lined the creek near the edge of the Granger pasture. Elias stood beside Keaton, Nora beside Juna. The girls scattered wild mustard petals along the path. There was no preacher, only the land, the trees, and their own words, spoken firm and plain. Afterward, Keaton led her to the small plot he'd bought with years of careful work. The house was modest, not yet finished, but the walls were up and the roof was sound. She stepped inside and turned in a slow circle, her fingers brushing the doorframe he'd carved with his own hands. "It's warm," she said, gazing around the room. "It feels like it's waiting." It was, he said. They lived there through the seasons that followed planting, mending, growing. Juna painted the inside walls with soft colors pulled from the hills around them. She kept a garden, and in the evenings, she sat with Keaton on the porch steps while the sun slipped low across the land. No one came looking for her. No letters arrived from the past. The silence of what she'd left behind never touched the walls of their home. In time, she painted again not jars or signs, but small scenes from the homestead. Keaton splitting wood, the dog curled beneath the porch, the slope of the ridge beyond the fence. She gave the first painting to him one evening as the fire crackled low. He looked at the image, then at her. "You made this?" "For you." He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes was answer enough. Years passed, and the house filled with the kind of quiet that held laughter, shared strength, and the kind of love that never had to be named to be understood. They grew older without growing apart. Every morning brought the same steady rhythm, 2 pairs of boots by the door, 2 hands reaching for one another in the dark before dawn. And every time Keaton returned from the field, Juna was there by the window, the same light in her eyes that had steadied him from the very beginning.